mortality rate associated with that. So if it's in poor condition, it's considered dead. If it's in excellent condition, I can't remember what the rate is, but so there's an incentive to increase the survivability, as you said, Mr. Alverson, by the fishers. And similar to what we've done in the Columbia River fisheries relative to salmon, where we had recovery boxes and we put the salmon in recovery boxes and supersaturated that with water flow, supersaturating then with oxygen to help try to revive those fish. Kind of a similar type of thing. They have developed a recovery tank, and where they pump significant volumes of water through that tank. And so they place halibut that are in medium or poor condition into those tanks, put them in those tanks for a period of time, wait for them to recover, and then discard the halibut over the side with release them. Thank you. And in some cases, it's proved to be quite successful, and the condition of the halibut then when they are released are better than they would have been had they simply been released immediately after they were brought on board.
Thank you. So are those live boxes required in regulation? Or?
They are not required. They're being, at my understanding, is fishermen are experimenting with those. And I think after we get some data relative to how it changes the condition of the halibut when they are released, that may lead to a regulation, or perhaps just the pure incentive to have a smaller mortality rate on the halibut that are released may be incentive enough for all fishermen to start using that practice.
Thank you. Mr. Risson.
I'd like to congratulate you for taking the initiative to take that step to, as far as using a revival tank, as we call them in the Canadian BC salmon fishery. It's part of our regulations to use that type of equipment for revival of salmon, and of course there are activities all through the summer and fall. But there's one thing I will warn you about. My wife had the pleasure of picking up a revived steelhead, and it promptly gave her a black eye. So once they're that lively, there's some issues that go along with releasing them back in the wild. Thank you.
Thank you for that point. Although thanks don't go to me, thanks go to the fishermen for taking the initiative to do it. But thank you.
Commissioner Benkin.
Thank you, Phil. I was just going to say, I hope that the results of that effort with the revival tank are shared with us, because it's certainly a concern we have with halibut that are released now from trawlers, and especially if there's whales around, if they're vigorous enough to get past the whales, and it's an interesting idea to give them that time to recover. So I hope you share the results as that moves ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner Benkin. I'll take that to heart and hope to make that a part of our report next year. Thank you. Thanks very much for the question.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to report 2.
Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Blair. I'm providing the news report for.
So Ms. Blair, have you been here before?
No, I have not.
I'm glad to hear that, because I didn't recognize you. So welcome.
Thank you very much. I'll be providing the NIMS report for Area 2A. The report summarizes tribal and non-tribal fisheries, including the length of the season and attainment. My colleagues in other agencies will be summarizing their seasons, so I won't go into too much detail, but I would like to direct you to the back page of the NIMS report, which contains a summary of our fisheries. We've estimated that Area 2A attained around 94% of its allocation, 1,249,000 pounds, and that's out of the 1.3 million pounds. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was to the point. I appreciate it. Any questions? One minute. Ms. Benkin.
I'm not sure this is a fair question of you. I just am thinking about 2A and some of the concerns we've heard with the survey from this year. Would be curious to see how commercial catch rates and survey weight per unit effort, I guess, rates from last year and what those look like and how they compare to this year, but that's probably not a fair question of you. We'll come up with those.
Sorry.
Any other comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So we have an additional report, a tribal report, if I may. Thank you, Chair. Which is listed as paper information 06, Inf 06. Thank you.
Is it under the agency report category?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'll just highlight a few things. The treaty tribal fishery is broken into 3 fishery components. The first is an unrestricted or derby style fishery. The second is a restricted trip limit fishery that's usually a 500-pound per trip fishery. And the final component is a late season or a mop-up fishery that's designed to take the remainder. And that can be structured either as an unrestricted or a trip limit fishery, depending on the remainder that's left in the commercial quota. Generally, we begin the unrestricted fishery on the international opening date. So that was March 11th last year. There are weather criteria associated with that. So the fishery did not actually begin in earnest. There was a bit of a start for some of the inside tribes on March 20th, but that was called off the water because of an intertribal dispute, and the fishery was prosecuted by all tribes on April 15th. So essentially a month later. CPUE was still very strong in that fishery, higher even than last year. And that was again reduced down to a shorter duration. It had been 48 hours in the past, and it was a 39-hour fishery this year. The restricted fishery was a 35-hour fishery at 500 pounds. Took less than expected, again, because of weather concerns. We had continual high winds in Puget Sound throughout the spring and early summer. And so the late season component you'll see occurred in mid-June for the ocean tribes and July 21st for the inside tribes, before the weather laid down enough for them to agree that it was good fishing to go and catch the river of that. Towards the end of the report, I would just direct your attention to the catch per unit effort in those various fisheries. The top line is the ocean fisheries. The middle line is the average of the two, and the bottom line is the Puget Sound catch per unit effort. All of those are up from last year, despite, again, the ongoing delays. Our staff recorded over 60 in-season calls to try to open the fisheries this year. So we spent a lot of time on the phone and a lot of time checking the weather and a lot of time discussing among the 13 tribal halibut managers whether it was go time. It took a long time to find that weather window. And despite that and the loss of bait from some of our guys, we still had higher efforts than we had seen in previous years. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. So this delayed or the determination of the opening day relative to weather and other considerations, that's all done by the tribal entities.
That's correct.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Bob, please.
So Rob, on the chart you have here, figure 2, you've shared this information with the IPHC staff, and is this where they got their information on the commercial CPUE number in 2A, where it shows it up?
Thank you, Bob. That's a good question, and it's an important distinction. This is actually a different measure of CP than what Ian and other Halibut Commission staff did. So when you see their report that the CPUE is up 22%
Right.
in the treaty tribal fishery, they measured that based on pounds per skate. And if you look just a little bit earlier in the report, a page up or so, there you'll see that we used a pounds per landing or a pounds per vessel, depending on the area. So it's a slightly different metric, just based on the way the tribes manage the fishery in season.
I'm sorry, could you go back to the one you had up a minute ago? I didn't find the report quickly enough here, but can you just explain to me, so the difference between what's going on with coastal tribes and Puget Sound tribes versus the tribal commercial fishery? So, right, they're all three tribal, but so explain to me the difference.
The closest corresponding would be to the dashed line in the middle. However, Ian measured the tribal commercial fishery as being a pounds per skate measure of weight per unit effort. And that's from the logbooks. The way we measured this was based on either pounds per landing or pounds per vessel, because depending on the area, for example, inside tribes are capable of making more landings within a given time. So we counted it by the vessel versus on the outside, looking at it by landing, because that's one landing per vessel. So it's a different measure that we include here based on the way we calculate effort among the tribes to manage in season.
But so the inside tribes are the Puget Sound tribes. So I think that was a question. How do you differentiate the tribal fishery, the tribal coastal fishery from the coastal tribes? Are those different sectors? Because there's different lines.
It's strictly, there's a distinctly different order of magnitude of the catch per unit effort. And we measure it slightly different for the coastal tribes compared to the Puget Sound tribes, but it's all part of the same tribal commercial fishery.
Thank you.
Thanks. Other questions? Mr. Asu?
Hi, I would think that would be for the Puget Sound fishery. I think that whole consideration would be there is protected waters and more of a weather protected area that could facilitate easier fishing. That's what I think would be going on there. Is that part of the picture?
It is, but it's balanced against a much smaller boat fleet. So they're smaller vessels, and there's a bigger tidal exchange as well to deal with. So.
Thank you very much, Rob. We appreciate that report.
Thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Chair. So just to note the change, we're going to move agency reports 5, 6, and 8 next to group them as one, if that's possible. Yes, washing.
You're doing a triple duty, 5, 6, and 8? Is that what I understood? Oh, okay. I just misunderstood. Please go ahead.
Wildlife, and I'm going to give the summary of our Washington halibut fishery management for 2017. So our halibut fisheries are managed under the Pacific Fishery Management Council's Pacific Halibut Catch Sharing Plan. The catch sharing plan specifies how the Area 2A total allowable catch is allocated to different areas in Washington state. The sub areas in Washington are the Puget Sound region, which is the inner sound portion of Washington, the North Coast, which encompasses the ports of Neah Bay and La Push, the South Coast, which encompasses the port of Westport, and then the Columbia River area, which goes from southern Washington down into Oregon. So we manage that area, coordinating with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Table 1 here summarizes the sub areas and the quotas that we had in 2017 and the catch that we had for each of those areas. I won't read them all to you. You can read there, but just point out that the total quota for our recreational fisheries was 243,667 pounds, and our total catch was slightly below that at 234,564 pounds. Starting in 2017, both the coastal and Puget Sound regions were managed with catch estimates that were produced on a weekly basis, enabling us to close each sub area when catch was projected to reach the quota. So we also, in 2017, had a statewide season structure for 3 of our management sub areas, the North Coast, the South Coast, and Puget Sound. The catch sharing plan was revised to establish this statewide season that had concurrent season dates for these areas. This is in response to a very popular recreational fishery with more and more fishing effort directed at a relatively stable quota. And what we've seen coming from that is halibut seasons that last from 3 to 5 days in our North Coast sub area. We've seen our seasons in the Puget Sound region go from a couple of months to as few as 8 days in 2016. So in response to this, we've been addressing it for the past several years. We've been working extensively to improve our in-season sampling methods, consider input from our stakeholders, and construct seasons that provide meaningful recreational opportunities that attempt to maximize the season length to the best we can. So one of the ways we've done that is trying to create overlap in the season dates that are open in each of these sub areas. So a couple of the sub areas are relatively close to one another. So if one area was open on a Friday and another area was open on a Saturday, you could travel from one to the other. By having concurrent season dates, it kind of limits the individual number of days and maybe spreads those out over a little bit longer period of time. The ability to do that and include the Puget Sound region was really enabled by our improvement to our sampling program for the Puget Sound, which then did provide this in-season management ability. So I'll just briefly go through how that worked for the North Coast and South Coast and Puget Sound areas. The North Coast area has traditionally been structured to be open on Thursdays and Saturdays. Under the statewide season structure, it did open on Thursday, May 4th, Saturday, May 6th, and Thursday, May 11th. And then after those initial days, there was a break period where we evaluate the quota to assess whether or not we have enough for another opening day. And at that point, it switched to a Thursday, Sunday season structure. We did see in this area a little drop in CPUE that we normally see. That's a pretty successful fishing for our coast, and that was down. In addition, the season was open for 9 days, which was quite long, and we saw effort drop off as that season went on. So the final season date was June 17th. The cumulative catch in that sub area totaled 100,000 pounds, 100,410 pounds, which was 5,683 pounds under the sub area allocation. So the South Coast sub area, of course, under this statewide season was open the same days, but would note that the traditional season dates in this area were Tuesdays and Sundays. And so the shift from a Thursday, Saturday to a Thursday, Sunday really reflected a lot of effort on our stakeholders' part to come to a compromise to to allow for this concurrent season. So we had a lot of discussions, and it was really our stakeholders that did the bulk of the work to come to the agreement to have this structure that shifted to the important day of Saturday for the North Coast, to the important day of Sunday for the South Coast for this year. The South Coast sub-area does reserve a portion of their sub-area allocation to allow for a nearshore incidental fishery. But after 5 days of the all-depth fishery, the total catch was 61 pounds, which was 10,000, a little over 10,000 pounds over the allocation, and which eliminated the ability to open that nearshore area. So the other sub-area that's included in this statewide season approach is the Puget Sound sub-area. This again was facilitated by this new sampling approach that we've been working on implementing since 2015. This 2017 was the first year that it was actually in place independently. We last year did it concurrently with an older sampling approach to just be sure we had everything worked out. So again, the same season dates, opening on Thursday, May 4th. CPUE was also down in this sub-area compared to recent seasons. Just to put that into perspective, in 2016, under a total of 8 fixed season dates, the catch was 102,699 pounds, which was 45,000 pounds over the 2016 sub-area allocation. And a reminder that in 2016, we did not have the in-season management ability, so we knew this after the fact. So this year, we're very pleased to report that the catch in the Puget Sound sub-area remained within its allocation and was open for a total of 9 days when the catch totaled 60,123 pounds, which was 4,839 pounds under the quota. Again, the Columbia River sub-area is co-managed with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's not part of the statewide season approach that we used in our other sub-areas. We haven't seen we haven't had the kind of struggle to provide a season length. This area, the season has lasted a little bit longer than other areas. Its season dates, it's actually open Thursday through Sunday, so 4 days a week until the quota is achieved. It was open a total of 14 days with the catch totaling 12,970 pounds, which was just 171 pounds over the sub-area allocation. So in summary, while we think that there's opportunity to further refine the statewide season approach, we think it was an improvement, and we look forward to having that in place again in 2018. So the next section will report on Canadian halibut landed into the Port of Neah Bay. This is part of our port sampling efforts in the Port of Neah Bay. And we're sampling halibut that are caught in Canada, landed in Neah Bay from March through October. We've seen a decrease in the number of halibut that are landed into Neah Bay, with 2017 total at 245 fish. There's a table here on the next page that shows a summary of that. Just going back to 2013, there were 690 halibut. It's continually decreased with 245 halibut caught in 2017. Similar decline in the number of boats and anglers there. And then just pointing out that this is halibut landed into the Port of Neah Bay, but there are other ports that could have Canadian halibut landings into them. We're not tracking those in, say, ports of CQ or Port Angeles, which would be just across the straits there. We also track the incidental halibut catch in the sablefish fishery north of Point Chehalis. There is an allocation that is allotted to the primary sablefish fishery north of Point Chehalis, but only when the 2A TAC allows for enough halibut for the recreational fishery. So this allocation comes from the recreational allocation, but only if there's a minimum of 214,110 pounds, and that provides a minimum of 10,000 pounds to allow for the incidental sablefish retention. With the 2A TAC at 1.33 million pounds last year, that actually allowed an allocation to the incidental retention of 70,000 pounds. The Pacific Fishery Management Council set a per sablefish landing restriction of 110 pounds of halibut per sablefish for the initial portion of the season. And then on May 11th, the landing limit was increased to 140 pounds of halibut for every 1,000 pounds of sablefish. The fishery did last through October 31. There were 15 vessels that made a total of 67 landings. At the end of the fishery, a total of 35,866 pounds of halibut was landed, which was only 50% of the 70,000 pound allocation. And there is a table showing that too. I can pause and take questions on those fisheries if you'd like. I also have our enforcement program has provided an enforcement report that I can go over.
Well, thank you. Let's see if there are comments or questions on the fisheries. Ms. Beck.
Just thank you. Just a clarification report, because I'm not that familiar with these fisheries, or question, sorry. When you talk about the directed sablefish fishery here in this section, I assume that's a commercial fishery?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not always clear where
Right.
you're talking about recreation and where you're talking about commercial. It might just help.
Thank you. Okay. I'll make a note of that.
Thanks.
Any other comments? Paul Ryall, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, maybe a similar question under Puget Sound sub-area. So the first sentence started off with an in-season quota management approach for the sub-area. So is that referring to the recreational fishery?
Yes.
Can you just provide a bit of an explanation of how that works?
Yeah, I'll back up a little bit. So until we had we've developed this new intensive sampling program for the Puget Sound region that we didn't have before. And part of that is on the coast, it's a lot easier to estimate angler effort on very distinct ports that I mentioned: Neah Bay, La Push, Westport, and ports in Columbia River. So our samplers can count boats going in and out, and that's the basis for our effort count. The Puget Sound region is a lot more spread out, a lot of private docks, and we have a much more difficult time to count effort. And so in the past, we had used a phone survey that helped us get our estimate of effort, and then that was combined with angler interviews that our samplers meet boats at the dock and question folks on what they caught. Combined together, we had an estimate of catch, but it was delayed. The phone survey was delayed so that we didn't have that weekly estimate that we have now. Our effort survey now relies on overflights, and those flights are flying over on days that are open to the halibut fishery. They're counting vessels. Our samplers then confirmed what the boats were doing. Were they fishing for halibut? Were they just on a pleasure trip? That sort of a thing. And that's the basis for our weekly estimates now, which is exactly the program we have in place on the coast. And that's the alignment that we really needed to assure our catch didn't go over our quota, and then to do the statewide season approach.
Thanks for that explanation. So it looks like it's working for you. You tested it out for a couple of years, and you're satisfied with that. It's going to provide the information you need. I was just wondering on Neah Bay, how do you know they were Canadian? Or
well, our port samplers ask oftentimes the anglers say, oh, you don't need to check me because I'm coming from Canada. So making sure that that catch isn't coming off their quota. I think if they're an enforcement officer, they're asking for their Canadian licenses and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Anything further? Thanks. Please move to the
Sure.
police report, or however you termed it.
This is a report on our enforcement staff's emphasis patrol. In 2017, there were 16 officers that participated on this halibut emphasis patrols. They contacted 2,095 fishermen, 109 commercial contacts, and 1,995 recreational contacts. They issued 201 warnings and 46 citations. They did have a focus area and a strategic plan to guide them on their enforcement approach for 2017. I won't go through all those. For the recreational season, the police did 4 emphasis using patrol boats. They had officers on U.S. Coast Guard boats and Clallam County Sheriff vessels to expand their at-sea presence. Some of the highlights from those patrols were what they found were high compliance with halibut rules, but they also, in conjunction with their halibut enforcement, discovered groundfish-related violations. We have a lot of groundfish restrictions during our halibut fisheries, so and we also prohibit the retention of yellow eye rockfish. And in the North Coast area, you can't keep canary rockfish, so we have several closed areas where you can't fish for halibut, and so those are the kind of things they're looking for. They did encounter a boat fishing in the closed area, and some failed to report, failed to use or to be able to show their licenses, fishing in the yellow eye rockfish conservation area. They also, moving down, monitored the commercial fisheries, and this includes charter. This particular blurb here includes charter violation that they discovered down in Port of Ilwaco with high grading, discarding fish, live and dead, exceeding limits, etc. They monitored the incidental retention fisheries and the salmon troll. No violations were found in the salmon troll, and conducted patrols during the open directed commercial halibut fisheries. And again, no violations were found in that directed commercial fishery. And I'll do my best to answer any questions on the enforcement report.
So the picture towards the top that looks like there's buoys floating off the side, are those rockfish?
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Thank you. I have a question for you on the follow-through with some of these violations. Are they people that where these violations are cited, are they prosecuted, and what, are you seeing fines that serve as meaningful deterrents?
That's probably something I can get back to you on. I know this last one here, this charter violation that made it into the newspaper, I think there are meaningful deterrents that are happening in that case. But I would probably need to have our enforcement staff speak to that.
Another issue that's been coming up for me in discussion with recreational commercial fisheries around the country is switching from enforcement, sort of chasing people down, to having people reporting in, on recreational fishermen reporting in using smartphone applications, or sort of putting the burden more on the recreational angler. And I just wondered if that's a approach that you've talked about in Washington, and if you have any insights on people's receptivity.
Well, I'll speak to these canary rockfish. So we don't have a way of reporting catch electronically other than our samplers. Somebody mentioned they have tablets now, which has really improved things. But in terms of anglers coming to us and reporting what they catch, we do have a catch record card. It's not used for quota monitoring because, as I was explaining, it's too delayed for us to be reactionary. We have worked in a more, and through our enforcement program, a more of an outreach effort to get folks to use descending devices, which are required on all of our recreational halibut and bottomfish trips. So that sort of a thing where it now could be a violation is now they're handing out descending devices and handing out fish identification cards to sort of help in that. It's not exactly answering your question in terms of reporting catch, but it's a little bit, yeah. Mhm.
Other questions or comments? Thank you very much for a good report. Let's see, we will do Oregon's, yes, ODF and W. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Lynn Mattis. I'm with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. I was going to speak to the ODFW report, and similar to Ms. Reed, I can give a quick summary of the Oregon State Police report as well, if now would be the appropriate time to do that since I'm up here. All right, okay. The Oregon report is AR06 Revision 1. This is a summary of the recreational and commercial fisheries off of the state of Oregon. Additionally, we provided some economic impacts based on the default harvest control rule or default SPR that we heard at the interim meeting. The Oregon recreational halibut fisheries receive approximately 20% of the Area 2A total allowable catch. And then that is split within Oregon into 3 sub-areas. There's a map of the 3 sub-areas in Figure 1. The Columbia River sub-area receives 2.3% of the allocation. The Central Oregon Coast sub-area, which is the majority of Oregon, then receives 93.79%. And the Southern Oregon sub-area, which is the 2 southernmost ports in Oregon, receives 3.91%. For recreational catch monitoring, the state of Oregon uses the Oregon Recreational Boat Survey, or ORBS. This program determines catches by port and boat type, and then we apply calculations based on trip level, looking at dockside sampling interviews combined with video boat counts out of most ports. In Oregon, for effort estimates, we are pretty lucky in that there are only a few key access points to the ocean, and they're funneled through ocean bars, so we are able to get a pretty good, accurate effort estimate through that process. Our orb samplers then are on the docks interviewing anglers when they return, and just for the Pacific halibut fisheries in 2017, our samplers physically sampled 3,809 fish, which was 32.4% of the estimated 11,754 halibut landed. Their sampling goal is approximately 25%, which is more related to salmon bycatch or salmon coded wire tag estimates, but we're the beneficiary of that. Similar to Washington, we have some pretty strict ground fish retention regulations with our all-depth halibut fishery, primarily to protect yellow eye. So there is no ground fish retention other than Pacific cod, sablefish, and other species of flatfish during our main all-depth fisheries. Looking into some individual subareas, Heather discussed the Columbia River subarea, which we co-manage, so I wasn't going to go into that again. Then the Central Oregon Coast subarea. This is, again, the subarea that contains the majority of Oregon. It's from Cape Falcon in the north to Humbug Mountain in the south. Under the current catch sharing plan, if the total 2A TAC is above 700,000 pounds, then there is a spring all-depth fishery, a summer all-depth fishery, and a nearshore fishery. any TAC below 700,000 pounds, the summer all-depth fishery cannot happen. And the allocation then gets split up to be 75% to the spring all-depth and 25% to the nearshore fishery. So this year, in 2017, all three fisheries were able to happen. The nearshore fishery, which is restricted to inside of 40 fathoms, began on January 1, 7 days a week. And it lasted until July 30th, at which point there was less than 1,000 pounds remaining on the allocation, which wasn't enough to open it for another week. However, later in the summer, around the Labor Day holiday weekend, we consulted with NIMS and IPHC on the status of our other fisheries that were going on in the state. And we were able to shift a little bit of quota around to reopen that fishery, which was helpful in taking some pressure off of our recreational bottom fish fishery. So we were able to reopen on August 28th and keep that fishery open then through the regulatory closure of October 31st. The total catch for the nearshore fishery was 34,865 pounds, which was within 2% of the adjusted allocation for the area. The all-depth fishery, again, that was split into spring and summer. The spring fishery is managed in two periods. Pre-season, we set up fixed dates. These are dates that are guaranteed to be open unless the entire spring, summer, and nearshore allocations are taken. This allows anglers and associated businesses such as charters, fuel, bait shops to plan ahead. Last year, we had 15 fixed dates. During the 5 openings, there were 2 that had really low effort on landings due to weather and ocean conditions, and the other 3 had really good weather, which allowed for some high effort. After the fixed dates, there was enough quota remaining for 3 backup dates to be open, so there was a total of 18 open days. After those 18 days, there was approximately 6,000 pounds remaining on the allocation, which is not enough for an additional all-depth day in that area. So that was then shifted and added to the summer fishery. The summer all-depth fishery is set to open every other Friday and Saturday from the first Friday in August until October 31st, or the quota is concluded. The last several years, the fishery has gone through till October 31st. After Labor Day, as the weather starts to change, people go back to school. A lot of sportsmen, outdoorsmen switch to hunting. Effort drops off. This year, after the 4th opening, we did consult with IPHC and NIMS, and at that time, there was only 2,000 pounds remaining, which wasn't enough for an additional all-depth day, even though we were into September. So the fishery was closed. And there was a total of 63,547 pounds taken out of the adjusted 66,000 pounds, so within 4%. The remaining 2,700 pounds, when the spring or the summer all-depth was closed, we then moved into the nearshore fishery to try to keep that open a little longer. So combined for the Central Oregon Coast sub area, the total catch was 24,046 pounds. This was 101% of the initial allocation, but when we did that adjustment from another area in September or late August, it brought us to 99.6% of the adjusted allocation. The last Oregon sub area is the Southern Oregon sub area. This is a small area from Humbug Mountain to the California border and includes the 2 southernmost ports in Oregon. We had a few years where this area had a lot of halibut in the area and had a lot of catch. The last couple of years, the catch has been a little bit lower. So this year, the total catch estimate was about a little over 2,800 pounds. And the initial allocation was 10,000 pounds. This area, more than the other areas in Oregon, is really affected by some weather patterns, as well as other fisheries occurring in the area because of gear conflict. We've heard of gear conflicts and some other things. So in total, the catch was estimated at 247,900 pounds, which comprised an estimated 11,754 fish averaging 21.1 pounds net weight. We had an estimated 20,400 targeted halibut angler trips, which contributed about $2.5 million to the coastal economies via spending on trips, fishing-related expenses, etc. Table 1 has a summary of the number of halibut sampled by each sub-area and fishery, the average weight for those fisheries, the total number of fish harvested, and then the total pounds. In regards to the commercial fishery, this primarily, we have 2 fisheries off of Oregon that fall into the commercial category, the incidental with salmon troll fishery, and then we have the directed commercial fixed gear fishery. Table 3 on page 7 is a summary of the commercial fishery halibut information off of Oregon, and this is just vessels that made landings into Oregon. This does not include Oregon licensed vessels that may have landed into another state. So out of the incidental salmon fishery, we had 39 distinct vessels make 85 deliveries, just under 4,000 pounds, for a total of approximately 27,000 pounds of ex-vessel price. The directed fishery in 2017 had 66 unique vessels, making 144 deliveries, just under 230,000 pounds, and a little under $1.4 million. We do note that the shoreside whiting fishery has some salmon bycatch, or excuse me, some halibut bycatch. They are not allowed to sell this. It's maximum retention, so they have to bring it in as part of their requirements. 13 vessels brought in a total of 648 pounds with no net economic benefits from that. Next, we tried to provide some information about what the proposed, or the default SPR harvest rate and the resulting 2018 FCEY for Area 2A might mean. Using the 0.47 million pounds, that would be approximately 65% reduction, and would decrease the value of the combined commercial and recreational halibut fisheries by $5.4 million in personal income and approximately 108 jobs. This was some modeling that one of our staff did, who works a lot with the NIMS economic people in the groundfish program. So it's estimated that we could lose coastwide, this isn't just Oregon, approximately 22,000 recreational angler trips and almost $2 million in commercial fishery economic impacts. So with that, I will try to answer any questions before moving on to the Oregon State Police report.
Thank you. Interesting report. Any comments or questions? I didn't, it's probably in here and I just didn't see it, but you made a statement that if the 2A TAC is less than 700,000 pounds, something happens, and could you tell me, is that here, or can you tell me what it is again?
Chair Balsiger, it's not specified in there in this report. It is a provision that's in the 2A catch sharing plan that if the 2A TAC, total TAC is below 700,000 pounds or below, that's the level where when you do the math out to the various fisheries, the amount that's available for the Central Oregon Coast subarea summer all-depth fishery isn't enough for a 2-day opening. It puts that allocation so low that we couldn't have a 2-day opening. We could maybe have a 1-day opening, which none of us really want to do. So there's a trigger at that point then that we eliminate the spring all-depth fishery, and the allocation that would have gone to the summer all-depth goes to the spring all-depth and the near shore. It expands the near shore fishery, so that lasts a little longer, and then we would just have the one all-depth fishery.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Any other comments? One more question.
Just if I could. So those all-depth fisheries, remind me again, these are the recreational fisheries you're talking about? Okay.
That is correct.
Thanks. So the enforcement report, please.
Sure. I am going to, like Heather, going to fill in for the Oregon State Police. They did provide a report in the materials. It's AR 07. It's a summary of enforcement activities. In 2017, the activity, this is for the Oregon State Police Marine section, which is fairly new in the last 3 to 4 years. Over 2017, through their halibut patrols, they contacted 979 anglers and had 112 persons not in compliance, which was an 89% compliance rate. And then there was 1 federal referral. There was a total of 17 individual troopers involved with 231 hours worked, as well as 115 and a half vessel hours, which is a combination of rigid inflatables and the Guardian. So the overall boat and dockside combined, there was 473 and a half hours devoted toward halibut by the state police. The majority of the violations that were noted during the recreational fishery were failure to validate harvest tag, no angling harvest tag, and incursions into the Stonewall Bank yellow eye rockfish conservation area. In Oregon, there is a requirement to use descending device when fishing for bottomfish or halibut. So they did as well do a lot of education and outreach with anglers on descending devices. Additionally, our troopers do help monitor the directed commercial halibut fishery. And in one case, they noticed what seemed to be a discrepancy between the vessel length in front of them and what the paperwork for the vessel was showing. And this discrepancy indicated that there was likely an overage in the trip limit for that vessel. Information was gathered and forwarded to the NOAA law enforcement for follow-up. There was I think 1 or 2 unlawful possession of halibut, but again, the majority of the violations were failure to immediately validate tag. With that, I will attempt to answer questions. I may have to write them down and get back to you folks.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Commissioner Ryall.
Yeah, you may not be able to answer this question, but when I look at the narrative on the enforcement, it talks about, I guess, day licenses on a charter vessel that people went out and they were not validated with date and time. So I guess implied within that narrative is that people are getting issued to them, but they're not being completed. And so they're still not actually having a license. And maybe they just turn the licenses back at the end of the day and if they don't catch a halibut.
Commissioner Ryall, most charter anglers do not have an annual fishing license. When they do purchase a charter trip, they are issued a one-day license. And at the time of issuance, it's supposed to be the date and all of that, so that's the one-day license. Failure to properly validate it would be not filling that in. And then, yeah, technically somebody probably could try to use it on another day.
Thanks. Any other questions? Thank you very much for the report. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
California?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Marcia Yaremko with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm a program manager over groundfish, halibut, and salmon. I'd just like to highlight some notables in our CDFW report for our 2017 Pacific halibut fishery. Under the Pacific Council's catch sharing plan, our California recreational fishery is allocated 4% of the non-tribal allocation. So I'll be starting by discussing the performance of our recreational fishery. The quota for 2017 under the catch sharing plan allocation amounted to 34,580 pounds for 2017, which is about 5,000 pounds greater than what we received in 2016. The fishery performance, we attained a total catch of 30,541 pounds, which was 88% of the quota allocation, but that's not because the fishery didn't perform. It's for reasons I'll explain later. The way we manage our fishery in California hasn't changed since 2015. We use pre-season fixed dates that are established by National Marine Fisheries Service, and then we do our in-season tracking to track our catch against our California quota by tabulating catches on a weekly basis. So we had planned open season dates in 2017 of May 1st through June 15th, July 1st through July 15th, August 1st through August 15th, and then open September 1st through October 31st, or until attainment of the quota in season. In actuality, in 2017, we got through September 10th, and at that point, we had determined that the quota was attained and the fishery was closed effective September 11th. So in 2017, the fishery was open a total of 86 days, which is only 3 days more than opened or than what was open in 2016, although we did have 5,000 pounds greater in the quota. So the fishery continued to perform successfully with the highest catches that we've ever seen in terms of catch rates in the month of August. There was 1 week of August where we saw more fish than we'd ever seen in a week before. 2017 was a different year for Northern California for our recreational fishery. We had no salmon fishing due to very, very low stock abundance of Klamath Fall Run. So no recreational opportunity, no commercial opportunity. So that made halibut all the more important as a target fishery for our recreational anglers in the North Coast ports. We also continue to manage with our normal 1 fish daily bag and possession limit and no minimum size limit. Just want to talk a little bit about our in-season monitoring process. Again, it hasn't changed since 2015 when we first moved to this way of managing our fishery. We do weekly catch projections to gauge the catch based on the number of fish that are sampled in the field. We then use a regression analysis to estimate about what we think that is going to amount to in terms of catch. We coordinated weekly as the season progressed with IPHC staff, NIMS, and Pacific Council staff. And when it looked like catches could meet or exceed the quota, we determined that closure date. And then we begin the process of notifying our public through a number of means, website postings, news releases, hotlines, flyers posted at launch ramps. So we do everything we can to ensure that folks are aware of the closure, since we only make that determination 4 or 5 days previously. It's been effective. We've had very good compliance with our season dates. And it appears that the word is getting out based on the compliance we've seen noted by our enforcement officers. There's a section in our report up here on the screen on corrections to some final catch estimates. And as part of our recreational fishery survey program, the staff do kind of routine reviews, QA/QCs of the programming code that is used to produce the monthly estimates of recreational catch. And in 2017, we had some change in the personnel that work in that shop. And part of their routine cross-checks of their estimation program revealed that, in fact, we had been reporting to you our catch estimates in round weight instead of in net weight. This is a very unfortunate discovery for us and for our angling community, because as a result, our catch estimates were being over-reported, and we essentially prematurely closed our fishery in 2015, 2016, and 2017. We've provided you the updated catch estimates in our report for your future consideration, and the problem has since been corrected. Also, IPHC asks us to report annually on what our recreational fishery discard mortality is. So we have provided that for you in our report. We collect information as part of our Creel census program on Pacific halibut that are discarded alive or discarded dead. We then use information to determine what the estimated mortality is using the groundfish management team's standard approximation of a 7% mortality rate for halibut that are released alive. We didn't have any halibut reported released dead in 2017. Moving on to a section in our report on the 2017 notables for our fishery. There were a few reports of Pacific halibut being caught around the Farallon Islands off of San Francisco. That's about 37 degrees north latitude. Last year, you might recall, we had a fish reported and actually observed by our samplers that was taken off of Santa Cruz. So we do continue to see these occasional onesie twosie catches south of the 40-degree line. Also notable, there was an almost 82-pound halibut caught on September 4th out of Eureka, which won the England Marine Big Halibut Contest in Northern California. It just beat out a 79-pounder that was landed a few weeks earlier. So fishery continues. We're continuing to see decent sized fish. Our average size of the fish hasn't changed. It's been right around 19 pounds the past 3 or so years. So it's holding steady. Then moving to our commercial fishery, this is kind of something that's been on our watch list where we did see some changes in 2017. We had 5 vessels participating across the three one-day openers, the 10-hour openers in 2017. This is a notable increase in participation compared to prior years. They landed just over 3,800 pounds in the ports between Crescent City and Eureka. Estimated value $28,000 ex-vessel. Again, this is a marked increase. Last year we saw about 1,000 pounds landed in the directed fishery. And prior to 2016, we really had no landings in the directed fishery whatsoever, maybe a couple of 100 pounds here and there. So we do have folks that are interested in continuing to participate in the directed commercial fishery off the West Coast. And they're kind of a new constituent group for us. So we've been working with them as the council continues to discuss potential changes to that fishery. And they also noted that they appreciated having this opportunity in light of the fact that the commercial salmon fishery in this area was completely closed. So they are looking for other opportunities, and this was one that was important to them. So with that, I'll take any questions on our report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Ms. Megan.
Thank you. I'm just curious how you're collecting some of the information, the discard rate, for example. So is that interviews on the docks with fishermen? How many fish did you release? What size were they? Is that the technique you're using?
Yes, thank you for the question. We have a pretty extensive Creel census program asking all types of questions on catch that was released, the condition of that catch, if they ascertain if the fish was alive or dead. We have pretty extensive photo guides to aid them with fish ID, particularly with our rockfish off California. We have a wide variety of rockfish species and they look very much alike. So we do our best to help anglers out and make sure they're properly identifying fish. And same, as you get further south, you get into California halibut land. And so it's very important to make sure that they are able to correctly identify the fish and give us as accurate a report as possible.
On your commercial fishery, you have 5 vessels and indicated interest. Is it open access? Can any fisherman get a license and try to fish halibut in California?
Yes, actually, this is part of the Area 2A directed commercial fishery. So it's the openers take place on the same day off of the coast of all 3 states. There's a discrete allocation within the catch sharing plan for this directed fishery. I think it's 30%, Len knows this off the top of her, I believe it's about 30% of the non-tribal quota or for Area 2A. So the fishery, the past couple of years has operated either 2 days or 3 days, depending on how much fish is taken. And then trip limits are used to adjust that fishery as needed to ensure we stay within that allocation.
Yeah, thank you. I should have realized it's part of the Pacific Fishery Management Council's commercial directed fishery. And it's reported as California because that's where they land the fish, or do you actually know they caught it off in California?
Yes, they also complete logbooks per your requirements. I'm pretty certain they were fishing right off California. It's only a 10-hour opportunity. I can't tell you exactly where they were, but I'm certain it's off California, and they did land into California ports and have California commercial fishing licenses.
Thank you very much. Lynn may have some augmented data.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, it's 30.7% of the non-tribal allocated for the directed fishery, and the 2017 amount was 225,591 pounds.
Thank you very much. Any last questions? Thanks for the report. Does that complete the 2?
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's now just a matter of seeing if the Coast Guard is in the room to present AR03. Yes, they are. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. It's hiding in the corner.
I was looking for braids on your shoulders, so I didn't spot you back there.
No, sir, I apologize. They don't, I'm not that important.
Well,
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Always appreciate the commission making the time to be able for the Coast Guard to come up and provide a few remarks about our efforts. This afternoon, I'm going to be speaking specifically to Area 2A. I'll have a counterpart that'll be here tomorrow to talk about our efforts up in Alaska. So just to start off really quick, we always try to give an overview on what kind of resources from a fisheries law enforcement perspective are still available and what's being done, what's being used to enforce these regulations. Along the West Coast in Oregon and Washington and California, there's been no significant changes to the laydown of resources that are available to us from small boat stations, Coast Guard cutters, and aircraft. So we're still flying, we're still running patrols out of the same locations, flying flights out of the same spots. So as the 3 states have already laid down the groundwork for this, I'll be very brief about how we play in the role for halibut and TUA. 3 derbies this last year. In 2A, we conducted 68 commercial vessel boardings. That's a slight tick up from previous years. I know that I believe last year the question was why down, and this year we're back up. And a lot of that is driven by weather conditions and the availability of our assets. Sometimes when you get outside of weather parameters for us to be able to launch and recover and conduct those inspections at sea. I'd be remiss, the states did a fantastic job of documenting their efforts. To the extent that there is success from the enforcement community in addressing halibut and halibut concerns and non-compliance issues within the halibut fishery, it is to the extent we're being successful, it's because of the partnerships that we have. Whether it be, I don't believe I have a colleague here from the NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement, but the partnerships that we have with Oregon State Police, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and California Department of Fish and Wildlife couldn't be stronger. And the coordination that occurs, you saw it in their reports, you'll see it in our reports as well. Those joint patrols that take place, the coordination and cooperation that goes into leading up to the commercial derbies. When these derbies happening along the coast, it is the topic of the day. it is what the Coast Guard is focused on. It is what our partners are focused on. Largely driven by safety concerns in the sense of a lot of vessels going out there, short opportunity to go out and fish. And so we're always looking at that and making sure that we have put resources in place to be able to respond should something come up, both from a law enforcement perspective, but also from a search and rescue perspective, obviously. In 2017, our forces identified 3 violations of or issued citations for noncompliance with halibut regulations, all related to vessels not having the vessel length and the permit data not lining up correctly. So what the Coast Guard documentation says, what the IPHC permit size, and then those issued that coming into a distinction between how much they were allowed to land. All 3 of those cases were turned over to NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement for follow-up and investigation. I believe their report also talked about some of the outcomes of that. And I apologize, I don't have those specific figures in front of me about summary settlements, but I believe if you look at the report, you'll see some of those, some of the reporting on what the outcomes of those cases and whether or not that was a significant deterrence. So similar to when the commercial derbies are going on, every day that there's a recreational all-depth opener along the coast, it is also something where we are seeing vessels go. We see a marked increase in the amount of traffic that goes across those bars off of Oregon, Washington, and California. And so those become areas of concern for us and focus for us in partnerships with the states. So we're out there on the waters trying to make sure that folks, when they're going out to hit those halibut grounds, that they're staying safe. We're kind of fortunate in the sense of the timing of those. The halibut fleet isn't the furthest ones to go out in the sense of some of our folks going out and targeting albacore, pushing even further out, but it is something that we continue to watch and be cognizant of, working on those area closure pieces that the states talked about. In 2017, the Coast Guard conducted, and I apologize, give me 1 second here, I gotta look at the number, 38 vessel boardings of vessels at sea that were recreationally targeting halibut. So with that, I do not anticipate any change to our posture in 2018. You'll see us continuing to focus on the commercial halibut derby days and working with our state partners during those recreational openers to make sure that the fleet stays safe. Pending, I'll happy to answer any questions that I might be able to.
Are there any questions?
Again, thank you very
I
much.
would just have to comment that you're pretty important in the process. So thanks for coming up and talking to us.
Thank you, Dr. Balsiger. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity.
And do we have NIMS law enforcement? All right. So we're slightly early, but let's take our 15-minute break. It's about 3:15, so we'll come back at 3:30. We'll be slightly ahead of schedule, and we'll do the 2B. I think that's what we're doing. I have too many pages here. I'm not clever enough. 2B reports. Thanks.
My name's Jim Paul. I work for last Department of Fish Systems.
Yes, sir. Yes, we didn't get a report from you last year, but we did this year.
That's right. I'm on the even year scale. Yeah, because we're only doing the harvest survey. Budget implementation, so I wasn't here last year. Everything I think is loaded up, so I'll just go.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Update everything.
That's what we'll try to do. See if there's any questions.
So how have things changed?
Not at all. So maybe I don't even need to do a report. Just get up here and say it's all the same. Yeah, actually, there's it's good to meet you. We just control the presentation.
I guess we have a quorum. Would you want to wait for Jake to come back? We're not in a hurry. We have plenty of time, so let's wait a couple minutes.
If we'll just also point out that there are some fumes in the room. I'm sure you've all noticed. Maybe the power of suggestion now that's been raised, but I'm feeling a bit dizzy. So we've turned the vents off, and the hotel is looking in to see what that issue is.
Best I felt all week. All right, we're going to do some Canadian reports, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, for having me. My name's Shane Peterson. I'm the Halibut Coordinator for DFO Groundfish Management. I'm going to give you a brief summary of our IPHC annual report for commercial and recreational as well. That's documents 9 and 10. I'll start from the top with document 9. For the purposes of domestic allocation, the Canadian total allowable catch, the CTAC, is composed of the FCEY, carryover from 2016, and food, social, ceremonial fish, FSC fish, i.e. subsistence fish. For 2017, the CTAC was 7.855 million net pounds, and the net carryover from 2016 to 2017 was nearly 22,000 net pounds. So for 2017, the commercial and recreational TAC was 7.39 million pounds. That includes all non-trawl commercial groundfish mortality for discards and landings. So the combined catch for commercial and recreational in 2017 was 7.17 million net pounds, which was under the allocation. Management measures for the commercial fishery include 100% at-sea coverage via electronic monitoring or at-sea observers, and 100% dockside monitoring. Commercial halibut, sablefish, rockfish, lingcod, and dogfish license holders also have individual transferable quotas by species and by groundfish management area. So just a bit of a summary on the notable factors affecting the Canadian halibut fishery in 2017. Those included, number 1, the Yellowfish Rebuilding Plan, wherein the second year of mortality reductions were implemented. Number 2, I have the Marine Conservation Target Initiative, including implemented closures for the Hecate Strait and Queen Charlotte Sound sponge reefs, the offshore Pacific vents and seamounts, as well as ongoing consultations regarding the Guayhanas Land Sea People Management Plan, the Scott Islands National Marine Wildlife Area, and the Northern Shelf Bioregion. So third, I've also noted that the halibut fishery is also undergoing review for continued marine stewardship certification. So again, that's just a very brief summary of report 9, and I'm happy to take any questions.
It looked like you may have been reading a sentence that said, or ended up with all subject to IFQ fisheries. Is that in here? I like the way it sounded, but I hadn't seen it before.
I'm kind of ad-libbing, so this isn't in the report itself, just some notes about our commercial
So
fishery.
do you have that in a note, and can you say it again?
Sure. Commercial halibut, sablefish, rockfish, lingcod, and dogfish license holders also have individual transferable quotas, and those are by species and by groundfish management area.
Thank you very much. That's what
You're
I was
welcome.
looking for. Any other comments or questions? I see none. Please, number 10.
Thank you. Yes, moving on. So this is our recreational fishery halibut catch report. So for 2017, the recreational TAC was 1.12 million pounds. So traditional catch monitoring and reporting programs in British Columbia include creel surveys and logbook programs. And these are used to generate catch estimates in the peak months, the summer months. DFO's internet-based recreational survey, IREC, collects information from recreational license holders on a monthly basis and is primarily used to estimate catch in non-peak months. As part of our standard in-season recreational review this year, catch estimates to the end of August 2017, which we combined with some catch forecasting for the month of December, indicated that an overage was quite likely. As a result, the recreational fishery was closed on September 6th. Confirmation upon receipt of September creel estimates resulted in an estimated catch to September 6 of 1.14 million net pounds, was an overage of 19,800 pounds. So report 10 also covers unique details of catch monitoring, including biological sampling by coastal area and catch estimates by Pacific Fishery Management Area, PFMA, and month are also provided in tables 5 through 9. Again, just a brief summary of our recreational report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Commissioner Elvis.
So I'm looking on page 3 of the pie charts. I'm looking at page 3 on your pie charts. There you go. And I'm just curious, in the South Coast, is that, I'm assuming that's southern Vancouver?
That's correct, yes.
And so you have pieces, which is individual fish in pounds list there. So disproportionate in size, it looks like. Do you get a big, is that what, you get a bigger fish in off that area?
That's correct. For 2017 at least, the average net weights for some of the southern PFMAs were larger.
Thank you. I'll ask you the question I've been asking almost everybody. Are you looking at electronic reporting, sort of smartphone apps for reporting in your recreational fisheries as supplemental alternative to the approaches you're using now?
Thank you, Commissioner. I think we continue to explore multiple ways to improve reporting in the recreational fishery. I think the use of smartphone apps is one of those things that's under consideration. Absolutely. How to submit surveys, et cetera.
Commissioners.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Just to comment, I would think that the difference in these charts, or the part of the difference of these charts, is the size of the recreational charter fishery in Prince Rupert, where there's a lot of people that drive from Alberta if they're with their own boats, and of course the residents, residents there that do operate charter operations there, and it's a pretty substantial amount of activity there. And of course, there is a lot of small fish in a lot of those areas outside of Prince Rupert proper. So when they're doing these activities, there's no shortage of small fish. So I imagine they're taking a lot more small fish in that whole process.
Thank you. Anything else? Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you.
Do we have, I believe number 11 would be a Canadian enforcement report. Oh, I'm sorry, well, please have a chair, but Commissioner Ryall.
Yeah, just to follow up on Linda's question, and either Adam or Neil behind me can certainly correct me where I'm wrong, but there's been for quite a number of years, been working with the recreational community to develop a Fisher application that's currently available on Apple phones, I guess, but not Android. Not sure why we're discriminating, but the intent is to start to collect data and provide that data to the Department on Recreational Fisheries, and that's the direction that we're moving in. Neil or Adam can provide some more details, Linda, if you'd like to hear about that in more detail. But it's a work in progress, and I think it took a while to get the application developed, but it takes quite a while to get security so you can actually get data back into the department. And so I don't know if that's been resolved yet, but it's easier to ship data out than it is to get back within the federal system. Had been one of the impediments. But Neil or Adam, do you want anything else?
Android is available now.
Oh, there we go. We just got an update. No more discrimination.
So this is one of our collaborative partners with the Sport Fishing Institute and the executive director Alberta. He's whispering over that normalized relationship between the cargo.
So do these like work on cell phone signals? So is that, or do they go satellites?
No, this wouldn't require a satellite. It would just work with your cell phone. So you need to be able to have reception, be able to submit the data.
So most of the coast of BC has cell phone reception within reasonable, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah. So this is just for this would be for the submission of the data, right? So you could do that, you don't need to necessarily be in your boat at the moment, but perhaps when you get back to an area that has.
Got it.
So the intent was a number of things. One was to provide all the regulations on an application so that when people were in an area, they would know what the actual regulations were. And so when you're in cell phone coverage, you can pick all that up and you then go fishing and you know what's going on and where you're fishing. And then similarly, when you are catching fish and you record them within your application, then you come back into cell phone coverage area, then the data could get pushed back to the department. But if you like, we could put together something, maybe not for this meeting, or maybe you'd like to talk to Owen and he can fill you in on more of the details but it's, I guess, Owen, we've been working on this probably for about 3 years, something like that. Yeah.
I'd just say I would really like to talk to Owen about it more or just learn more about the program. However, if we get a chance this week or if there's something you can provide in case that opportunity doesn't show up, but I would definitely like to learn more
Sure, we
about it.
can do that for sure.
Thanks.
Interesting. So please, the enforcement report.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, my name is Ann Bussell. I'm the Groundfish Enforcement Coordinator with DFO, part of the Conservation and Protection Program. And I'll try and make this as brief as possible. In 2017, halibut enforcement activities included 167 vessels with 557 fishing trips recorded. All of them 100% monitoring at sea and dockside. Enforcement priorities for the year were similar with a couple of similar to last year with a couple more added, but closed areas, hails and the dockside monitoring program, halibut caught without authority of license, particularly with the intent to sell, dual fishing, particularly problems with following the conditions of license. Our EM systems, any failures such as time gaps, false and misleading information provided to our dockside observers, and any allegations of the dockside observers not doing their work. So for 2017, there were 68 commercial halibut occurrences, 46 recreational, 31 Aboriginal. And the Aboriginals were referring to the food, social, ceremonial, or subsistence fisheries. And that's a total of 145 occurrences. And I'll just note that in any one occurrences, there can be multiple violations, or some of them aren't technically a violation. So that's the difference between this table and the violation table. Enforcement effort in 2017 for the Aboriginal fisheries, there were about 427.5 hours spent. For the commercial fishery, 592.25 hours, and for the recreational, 500.5 hours. And that overall represents about 2% of enforcement effort for fishery officers because they're very multitask and there's many different fisheries in the Pacific region. We have an aerial surveillance program that supports us, and there were 166 missions, including 879.49 hours. And during those missions, about 500 halibut vessels were recorded. And there's always an officer on those flights, and they will record the location vessel name, vessel registration number, and they may take photos or video depending on what they find. They're very helpful, for instance, in enforcing the seabird avoidance gear for our halibut hook and line vessels. Now I'll go to a summary of violations in 2017. Each of the tables I've given previous years, but I'll just focus in on 2017. There were 14 in our Aboriginal fisheries, 25 in our commercial, and 80 in our recreational fisheries, for a total of 119 violations. Of those, there's about 3 significant investigations underway, 2 for our closed areas in our Hecate Strait marine protected areas for the sponge and corals, and both vessels also fished in adjacent rockfish conservation areas. So something that was significant in 2017 were a couple of convictions for closed areas. One involved a marine protected area, and the fine was $45,000. The other was a rockfish conservation area, and the fine was $25,000. So these will be significant for the current investigations for these new closed areas. So with the court system, we're seeing significant fines. They are taking it very seriously as well. The other 2 significant investigations, one involves illegal sale of halibut to several seafood businesses. Charges have been laid in that case. It involved quite a significant investigation. And the other is unauthorized FSC fishing during a dual fishing trip. And dual fishing is permitted in our waters, and it means that FSC fishing may occur on a commercial trip. So there has to be a FSC communal license, and then of course the commercial license for that vessel. And that's it. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Mencken.
Thank you. In these significant convictions, are those commercial vessels? or-
Yes,
Okay,
they're commercial.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'd thank you for that report. I'd just like to add on the dual fishing expeditions, you want to call them that, but all those fish are also validated as for the FSC purposes. And that's part of the whole agreement when it comes to entering into a dual fishing operation. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much for the report. I appreciate it. So, Mr. Executive Director, that is where our agenda ended, but I know we skipped a couple reg proposals, so we do have some ADF and G people in the, well, our agenda showed us we would go through Canadian waters to be today. So I was thinking a piece might be the 2 ADF and G reports, but I'm happy to break 2 depending on what you think we should do. And I'm going to ask the ADF and G people if they're prepared this afternoon. They both said they could.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I would recommend we take some of the Alaska region reports, particularly because we'll be taking up some of tomorrow morning's time with the agency regulatory proposals. So we could potentially take the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council and the 2 ADF and G.
I don't think the council chairman's in the room, which is the reason I suggested ADF and G might fit in real well right now.
So AR 14 and then AR 15. Thanks, Chair.
So Dr. Fall and Mr. Meyer. Scott Meyer first. This is report number 14.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Scott Meyer with Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and I'll just give a summary of the sport fisheries in Alaska. This presentation is a little different than the report, which is more in a letter form, and this also gives some figures with historical perspective. So a little different look, but a lot of the same information. ADF and G provides, let's see, keep going here on the, Do I have control here, Tom? Say again? Keyboard errors.
Errol.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, nothing happening. There we go. Okay. So ADF&G provides to the IPHC each year, this letter includes numbers of halibut harvested and released by sector, meaning guided and unguided, or charter and private, as you wish. Also by regulatory area, the average weight of the sport harvest, the total harvest and release mortality in pounds, the harvest prior to the mean date of the IPHC survey. And then occasionally we're asked by the commission to provide information on length composition and age or sex composition, which we have done a few times in the past few years. The data sources, the other way, data sources for this, for the charter sector, we use a logbook that's mandatory. It's a statewide logbook that's been in place since 1998 and has been used for charter. It's been in place since 98, but it's only been used for accounting of charter halibut since 2014 for actual management. The second big source of information is the statewide harvest survey, which is a mail survey. It's statewide, includes all species of fish, fresh and salt, guided and unguided. It's sent to a stratified random sample of license holders, and they send out about 45 to 47,000 surveys a year, and we have about a 45% response rate. We get back about 20,000 responses per year. And then the third big data source is creel sampling at all the major ports. The yellow dots show the 17 ports that were sampled in 2017 in area 2C and 3A. And we measured 8,700 halibut in area 2C and about 5,000 halibut in area 3A. Just a little background on the charter fleet. Because we have the logbook, we can drill down and get some excellent data on the charter fleet, and charter guides and businesses are required to be licensed in Alaska. So this is a combination of license and logbook data. Basically, in 2016, we had about 564 active businesses, a little over 1,200 active guides, and 1,000 active vessels that fished in the state in saltwater. The second table shows just charter vessels that actually harvested at least one halibut. We had 506 vessels in 2C that harvested at least, they were active in the halibut fishery. In 3A, 360 vessels, and then you see a small number, 26, that operated in both area 2C and 3A, and just another 4 vessels in the whole rest of the state. I should also mention, this is probably a good time to mention that we have developed an electronic logbook an electronic version of the logbook for the charter sector, and that was piloted in 2017 and will go active in 2018. It's an HTML-based log version that's probably best viewed on a tablet or an iPad, but works with any device, including cell phones. And similar to what Canada was talking about, it's you don't need connectivity to use the logbook, just to submit to upload the trips when you're done. And that logbook collects the same information as the current paper logbook. It'd be up to the operators to decide which format they won't choose to use. It collects the exact same information, but we're planning enhancements for usability in the future. Okay, just jumping to a harvest summary. Here's for area 2C, sort of the history of charter harvest as far back as we can separate charter from unguided harvest. The gray bars represent estimates that were based on the mail survey, which we did not start, we didn't start using the logbook until 2014, and those are the blue bars you see at the end. The red dotted line you see is the allocation, which was actually more of a guideline before 2014, and then strictly an allocation from 2014 on. And you can see quite a few features in this plot. Big drop in 2009 when the fishery went from a 2-fish bag limit to a 1-fish bag limit. Another big drop in 2011 when the IPHC imposed the 37-inch maximum size limit. And then starting in 2012 is when the North Pacific Council started recommending on an annual basis management measures for the charter fleet, and the harvest then coming back up and being managed very close to the allocation. In 2017, the charter harvest, including discard mortality, was 921,000 pounds, which was a 0.7% overage of the charter allocation. Area 2C unguided harvest. This is based all on the statewide harvest survey estimates. And the 2017 number, I should point out, is preliminary. It uses the average weight from 2017, but it's just a projection of the recent harvest trends. It's just a time series forecast. The harvest, as you can see, is highly variable from year to year, but has been generally a little higher in the last 5 years or so. And that's probably a reflection of lodges in Southeast that used to offer charter fishing are now offering for you to come and just fish on your own boat. And that's technically unguided harvest. So we'll probably see that slightly higher level there is just people's lodges circumventing the charter regulations by offering unguided fishing. And then seeing these two harvests side by side, because they were plotted on different axes, you can see the relative magnitude of the charter and the unguided harvest. And starting in 2011, you can see that the harvest by the unguided sector, even though it didn't, it's just a little bit higher than it has been on average before that. It's now the primary fishery, accounts for most of the removals in 2C. So now jumping to 3A, same story with the graph. The blue bars are when we started using logbook data. And you can see the allocation. You see the harvest decrease in 3A, the charter harvest decreased before the allocation did. And that was a reflection of the economic turndown in the late 2000s. You see it in the unguided sector too. And then you see the drop in the allocation, the drop in the GHL, which was due to declines in the stock. The 2017 harvest estimate was 2.093 million pounds, which is about 11% over the allocation. And 3A has been over the charter allocation every year since 2014. 16% the first year and 11% each of the next 3 years. The unguided sector, again, highly variable from year to year. And recent harvest is about the long-term average, or at least back to 95. It was about 1.86 million pounds. And putting these two sectors together so you can see relative magnitude, you can see the decline in the charter harvest, the relative stability in the unguided harvest, and their charter harvest is a little bit bigger than the unguided harvest. Moving out to Western Alaska, things are pretty different out there. The sport removals are not part of the FC, they're not allocated. They're quite small. The charter sector is not part of a catch sharing plan. So we don't break them up into guided and unguided. These are the estimates for both sectors. And they're part of the other removals, not part of the FCEY. We don't have any sampling programs in Western Alaska. We use the mail survey to estimate the total charter or total sport harvest. We don't have any sampling for average weight. Therefore, these plots are in numbers of fish. And the IPHC, for the IPHC's purposes, we apply the average weight of the unguided harvest at Kodiak, which is unconstrained by a size limit, as these fisheries are. Again, the 2017 values are just preliminary estimates, but we're not talking about very much fish. In Area 3B, the estimate was 8,000 pounds for 2017 and 15,000 pounds for Area 4. As you know, starting in 2014, we're accounting for release mortality in sport fisheries. And these are the estimates for 2C, 3A, 3B, and 4. And we get numbers of released fish from either the logbook or the statewide harvest survey. And then we're using assumed mortality rates, which differ by area. And to get the sizes of released fish, it's a modeling exercise. I could go into more detail if you needed it, but it was a modeling approach that was reviewed by the North Council Scientific and Statistical Committee. Actually, Bill Clark was part of that review. You can see one interesting feature: last 2 years in Area 3A and in the last year in Area 2C, a drop in the release mortality. The numbers are released, that's mostly due to numbers of released fish. And that's consistent with what the IPHC longline survey is seeing, reduced numbers of small fish in the survey. But the removals, even though the release mortality rates range from 5 to 7% for different sectors, you see that because the average weight of released fish is less, that the release mortality only accounts for about 1 to 3% of the magnitude of the harvest, or of the, excuse me, of the removals. As I said, we sometimes have provided length composition, and we analyze length composition every year, at least for the charter sector, when we provide the analysis for the council of alternative management measures for the charter sector each year. And whenever they include length limits, then we'll summarize the length composition information. And this is just an example plot from 2016 for 2C. I'm not going to run through or show you both areas, but you can see the effect of the size limit on the charter sector, where the harvest is essentially truncated at 109 centimeters, which is the 43-inch maximum. Well, there's a slot limit in 2C, but it's basically a 43-inch maximum size limit, and then you can keep fish above 80 inches. It's just an example of the type of data we provide. We also provide age composition for Area 3A only. We collect otoliths. We started doing it in 1994. We aged those otoliths through 98, had annual exchanges with the IPHC, and since then, we just ship them the otoliths and they age them, and then we provide the plots. It's very similar. You can see the 87-year class, all the same features that you see in the commercial data you see in the sport data. The difference being that you can see that halibut recruit to the sport fishery earlier. They start really becoming a big part of the catch around age 6, and it's more like, what did Ian say, 9 to 18, I think. So, and then finally, we also collect sex composition information. It hasn't been used for anything, but it's easy enough to get. You just look at the gonads and record the sex. And this is, to me, interesting data because you see a much lower proportion of females in the sport harvest data than you see in the commercial harvest. And it's probably a reflection of the sport fishery catching more small fish, and some mandated by a maximum size limit on one, at least on one of the fish in the harvest. And because there are more small fish, you're going to get more males. Interesting thing about Seward is it's always been a fairly low proportion of males, around 60 to 70%. And that's different than what we see at the other ports. Homer's more like around 80%. Percent females, yeah. And the two lines are the charter versus the private. Just finally, I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of people, just as with any agency, there's a lot of people that do all the work. All I do is gather up all their work and put it all in one place. But we have folks in the logbook. The catch sampling programs in 2C and 3A are huge. And I also want to thank all the anglers and charter operators that provide all this information. We wouldn't get it without all that cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions?
So Scott, I really liked the tables you had, and we don't have those on our computer here. So could you make sure that the staff gets that, and then we can get those distributed or added to the annual meeting?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Alverson, I've already provided it to staff, so we're good to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the report, Scott. I do have a couple questions for you. With the electronic logbook, and I guess also with the paper logbook on guides, what is the timing limits on when those have to be turned in? Is it weekly? Is it end of trips? I don't remember that.
Mr. Chairman, Linda, it's kind of tricky, but for trips, I don't remember the exact dates, but I can give you a general gist. For trips prior to April, you have to fill out the logbook by the end of the trip. Your logbook has to be complete before you offload any passengers or fish. And that's true all the time. So if you're just, walking down the dock headed for the bar at the end of the day and your logbook isn't filled out, that's going to be a ticket. But in terms of submission, for trips prior to April, you don't have to turn them in until there's a date in the logbook. I mean, the date that every page is required is kind of laid out on the inside cover of the logbook. So you have to turn it in sometime in April. And then from that point on, I don't know if that goes the rest of the year or till some point in the fall, basically have to submit your logbook data within a week of the last day of each week. So you could be almost 2 weeks for a Sunday, but for a Saturday, the last day of a week, it's a week after that. So for this given week, you have to turn in all that by the end of the next week. So it's roughly 1 to 2 weeks, depending on what day you fished. But the whole submission schedule is right on the inside cover of the logbook.
Thanks for that. So with the electronic, it's sent in electronically. Paper is faxed in, sent in. How are lodges getting you paper?
Paper is submitted it can either be mailed to the department or turned into an area offices. A lot of the area offices have after hours drop boxes. And the next morning we stamp the date received on every logbook sheet that we receive. And with the electronic logbook, I should add, you'll still need to have a paper logbook on your vessel in case you have a device failure. If you choose to report electronically, you still need to carry a paper logbook.
Great. And then one more, if I could. With the boats that are going to the assisted unguided model, or lodges that are renting boats without a guide, those lodges for those trips are not required to do a logbook at this point. Is that correct?
That's correct. And they fall under the unguided fishery rules, but we're capturing that harvest through the statewide mail survey for unguided anglers.
Thank you.
Commissioner Runhide.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. On your electronic logbooks, are you, even though you're outside Wi-Fi or cell coverage, is it recording time, date, and latitude, longitude positioning? And is this a requirement?
Mr. Chairman, not latitude and longitude, rather they're required to report the ADF&G statistical area, and the size and shape of those areas varies a lot by state, but they're relatively small areas. Some might just be a few square miles, and actually some are quite big. just depending how far they are away from shore and how convoluted the shoreline is. But they don't record the date because some people will start filling. We talked about that, having an auto date fill feature, but some businesses will start filling out the logbook. They're required. I think our logbook is unique in at least in our country, and I haven't heard of one anywhere else that's like this. We require the operator to record the name and license number of each angler and that individual angler's catch. And so the lodges or some guide outfits will actually start to fill the logbook out the day before the trip so they get all the names and license numbers in there. That has to be in the logbook before the trip begins.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So Scott's been kind of the driving force behind the North Pacific Council being able to figure out management measures that have brought the charter boat catches down pretty close to the line, not quite in Kodiak, as he mentioned, not in 3A, but in 2C. It's remarkable how those management measures have accomplished that. And Scott's been a good friend for a long time, and I'm only saying this because it's perhaps his last meeting, since for some obscure reason he's going to separate from ADF&G. So he's been a great person to work with, not just at the Halibut Commission, but at the agency and at the council. So greatly appreciate that. And since it's your last meeting, I've got a question I wanted to ask. So what do you think is the principal obstacle that keeps us from getting the recreational fishery under the same kind of guidelines that the charter boats have?
I know that's a tough question. The principal obstacle. When I look back over the history of how the whole management of the sport fishery developed, and the management of the charter sector anyway, is the first proposals only dealt with the charter sector, and the council, it seems, has had come to at least two decision points where they had the option to wrap in. I mean, the first obvious one was when a cap on the charter sector was first proposed. There was an opportunity there. I think the IPHC recommended, I think the department even recommended, just deal with the sport fishery, but the council didn't do it. And it was talked about again a lot after the IFQ program for the charter was rescinded in 2005. Seemed like there was another very explicit discussion about, why don't we just wrap the unguided sector in? And it hasn't happened. So now it would require a revisiting the catch sharing plan to establish another user group in there.
Thank you very much. You got more history in this stuff than a lot of us, so I thought it was useful just to get a few points. So I appreciate that.
Probably didn't add anything.
No. Thank you, Scott. Dr. Fall. This is report 15. When you're ready, Doctor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jim Fall, and I work for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, the Division of Subsistence, as the statewide program manager. And this PowerPoint presentation is, I think, report 15. There's also a 4-page project summary for those of you who like paper. I do have some of those if anybody would like one. Our project is funded through a grant from the National Marine Fisheries Service. So we do this under contract to NIMS. The full study findings are in a much larger technical paper. I also have a couple copies of those if anybody is interested, and at the end of the report, I'll give some instructions about where you can download that. And I should emphasize that this is a report about our estimates of subsistence harvest of halibut in calendar year 2016. Most of the reports that you've been getting today pertain to 17, but it takes us about a year to collect the information, pull it all together, and so it lands at this meeting for 2016. Since I didn't give a report last year, here's a short refresher on project background. New subsistence regulations for subsistence fishing for halibut in Alaska came into effect in May of 2003. Fishery itself, of course, is thousands of years old, but the regulations didn't really address it until 2003. In order to participate in the fishery, you must be a resident of one of 118 rural Alaska communities or a member of 123 Alaska tribes who have customary and traditional uses of halibut. In order to participate, you must also register with the Restricted Access Management Division of NIMS, the RAM division, and obtain a subsistence halibut registration certificate, which we call a SHARC for short. The regulations adopted by the North Pacific Fishery Management Council have a provision for collecting harvest data. And the report that I'm going over now covers the 12th year of the harvest assessment program, again, harvest in 2016. And due to funding limitations, we did not conduct this project to collect harvest information for 2013 or 2015, nor will we be documenting harvest for 2017. If funding becomes available, we're more than happy and very willing and eager to do this project to collect information for 2018. The primary way that we collect this information is a mailed survey. The response to this survey is voluntary. The survey form, which is one page and it's Appendix B in the full report, return postage paid. We mail this form to every person who held a SHARC during any portion of 2016. That's 8,779 people. We do an initial mailing and then 2 follow-up mailings. We supplement the mailings, in-person interviews in just a few communities in the state, conducted by our staff or with tribal partners. We've emphasized Area 4 in the last few rounds of this work because of low levels of enrollment and historically lower participation in the mailed survey. When we go to a community for this, we do work with tribal governments and other knowledgeable people to assess our list of SHARC holders, and we do supplement that list with people who are known to be engaged in this fishery but have not registered. That added 146 people to our list. So our total target group is 8,925 potential subsistence halibut fishers. So how did we do in 2016? We have 5,860 returned surveys of those potential fishers. That's a sampling fraction 66%. If we remove from that total people who have passed away, non-deliverable surveys and so forth, the response rate is 71%. And high rates of return were achieved in most of the larger communities with the most sharks who account for most of the harvest. There's a great deal of detail on our sample in the full report. The next graph shows sampling since the first year of the program in 2003. Each bar shows the total number of sharks issued, and then the darker portion of the bar is how many surveys we got back, and then the numbers are the sampling fraction. The 66% response rate for 2016 is the third best we've had for the program overall. And I should add, I was a little bit worried about a decline in response rates since we're now doing this every other year, and we have not seen that. In terms of our findings about the harvest, we estimate that in 2016, there was about 4,400 people who participated in the subsistence halibut fishery. Our estimated harvest is about 37,000 fish for about 730,000 pounds net weight, plus or minus 3%, with that net weight being 75% of the round weight that the survey respondents report to us. That's an average of 19.8 pounds per fish net weight. 60% of that harvest occurred in Southeast Alaska, that's Area 2C, 31% in South Central Alaska, that's Area 3A, and 6% in Area 4E, the Bering Sea coast. 75% of the estimated harvest is taken with set line gear and the remaining 25% with hand-operated gear, mostly rod and reel. The next graph shows our estimates of participation in the fishery, again back to 2003, the first year of the program. The 4,400 estimated subsistence fishers in 2016 is below the 12-year average of about 5,200, but that estimate of participation has been fairly steady since 2011. And I should also note that the percentage of shark holders who actually participate in the fishery has gone up over the years and was about 50% in 2016. The next graph shows the history of harvest estimates in numbers of halibut. The harvest estimate peaked within the first 5 or 6 years of the fishery. Then there was a steady decline each year until about 2010, 2011, and then that estimate leveled off. And we really can't say that since 2011 we really have any real change in the harvest estimate in terms of numbers of fish. And the same thing goes for our estimates in terms of net weight, although the decline from the early years of the harvest estimates is steeper. And that's because the average weight of a subsistence taken halibut declined in the early years of the fishery. That's the next graph. Until about 2008, 2009, it was about a pound per fish per year. That overall estimate of the average weight of a fish, that's also leveled off since then. Although in 2016, we did see a notable increase in the average weight of a fish up to almost 20 pounds, and that is the highest average we've had since 2006. The next graph shows the distribution of the harvest by management area in 2016. Again, with most of that harvest occurring in Southeast Alaska at 60%, 31% in South Central. 4E is historically the third largest harvest at about 6% in 2016. These percentages have also been very stable since the inception of the program, with Area 2C and 3A together accounting for over 80 and sometimes as much as 90% of the total Alaska harvest. The percentage and the harvest estimate for 4E, however, has been more variable over the years, and that is linked probably more than anything else to whether we go out to some of the key halibut communities and talk to people face to face. In the years when we didn't do that, the harvest estimate dropped substantially, and we don't have a lot of confidence in those estimates for those years, such as 2011, 2012. But more recently, we've gone out to communities, people participate, we get great support from tribal governments, and we have more confidence in those estimates. And in terms of where the subsistence fishery fits in to overall removals in the state in 2016, the subsistence fishery accounts for 2.3% of total removals. And that slice is our estimate from the harvest surveys, plus retention of the U-32 fish in the community development quotas. That's a legal retention program for Western Alaska. The rest of the information is provided to us by the IPHC staff. That's 2.3% statewide. Different parts of the state, the subsistence harvest ranges from 6.4% in Area 2C to 0.4% in Area 3B. And that 2.3% has been pretty steady the last few years, and it's ranged from 1.2 to 2.3% since 2003. So to conclude then, we think that overall the 2016 harvest survey was a success. We had good response rates, and we think overall our harvest estimates are quite reliable, especially for Area 2C and 3A. We can now, after 12 years of data collection, discern some general patterns in the fishery since the new regulations came into effect that I've summarized this afternoon. The reasons for the overall decline in harvests after the first several years of the fishery and the more recent trends are complex. I think they require some additional investigation. But as I said, in recent years, that harvest level has basically stabilized. We do talk about in the report a bit about concerns of non-renewals of sharks, especially in the more remote parts of the state. Some outreach is probably needed in those areas. In the report before the last one, the report for 2016, we did include an evaluation that we did of renewal patterns. We found that it was more likely for shark holders who did not fish at all or who never responded to our survey to not renew. So that's good news, that I think that the numbers that we have now are more likely reflect people who are going to participate in the fishery. But nevertheless, that analysis did show that some past fishers have also dropped out of registering, especially in the more remote portions of the state. So certainly if the program continues in the future, the mailed survey can continue to be the primary method, but we still think that supplementing that with in-person surveys with tribal partners in certain areas of the state is going to be necessary. And finally then, for more information, the complete final report is available at the ADF&G Division of Subsistence website, where you can download it and print it. We have limited paper copies also if people do want that. And with that, I will conclude and see if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Good report. Do we have questions or comments? Commissioner Ryall.
Thanks very much for that report. So on your views about the overall decline in harvest, is there a plan to try to ascertain what's happening?
Not any formal plan. Certainly we do hear from people when either we talk to them in person, and people also comment on the forms that they send back to us. We think that in general, that the decline from the first 4 or 5 years of the program to 2009, 2010 reflects less success in harvests, and also reflects a decline in the size of the halibut that people were taking. So we think that is a real decline. We don't think that that is an artifact of sampling or anything like that. That's at the fishery level. It's more complex, I think, at a regional and especially at a community level, where sometimes sampling problems do affect our estimates, as I've said before in 4E. But overall, it's a complex thing. But I think in general, the decline reflects the decline in the stock and the fish size in those early years, and now is leveled off.
Other comments? Thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate the report. So I noted that after finishing Area 2B, our agenda called for public comment, and I skipped right over that. So, and the chance for someone in the room that intended to make a public comment, now would be a fine time. I see no volunteers. And I presume no one. Oh, do we? Oh, please.
Probably best for Scott, but I don't have anyone else here from the earlier presentation. I was curious to know a bit more about how the recreational catch in 2C and 3A is monitored in season, or if it is.
Thank you for that. And Keith, Mr. Keith, I presume no one online had it. Okay, so in that case, I think we'll adjourn for the evening at 9 o'clock in the morning. We'll start with the remainder of the Alaska reports, the council enforcement, if anyone's here. And the reception will be this evening at 7 o'clock upstairs in the other hotel on floor 23. Thanks, everyone.